For 11 months, Jessica cleaned every room in that mansion except one. The staff called it the sealed wing, and changed the subject if she asked twice. She told herself it wasn't her business. She told herself a lot of things, because the pay was triple what anyone else in this city would offer a housekeeper, and her brother's tuition didn't care about her comfort. But there had been a maid before her, Soo-yeon. Her name was still in the household ledger, her schedule still penciled in for a week that never finished. She didn't quit. She didn't collect her last check. She didn't take her coat off the hook by the back door. She just stopped. And the man Jessica worked for, the man half of Seoul crossed the street to avoid, kept that wing locked like it still had someone standing in it. If you like it, subscribe. Tell me what city you're watching from. I read every one of them, because Jessica was about to find out exactly why that room was never touched again. And someone in that house already knew she'd figured it out. The estate sat behind 2 gates and a half-mile of pine trees, the kind of property that didn't show up on any map a normal person would use. Jessica had taken 3 buses and walked the last stretch because the agency said cars weren't allowed past the second checkpoint. The woman who hired her, a sharp, tired household manager named Miss An, didn't smile once during the interview. "You'll have Sundays," Miss An said, sliding the contract across the desk. "You'll have your own room in the East Wing. You will not enter the West Wing under any circumstance. Not to clean it, not to look at it. Not for any reason. What's in the West Wing? Nothing that concerns you." Jessica signed anyway. Triple pay for a housekeeper was not a number you argued with when your brother's spring semester was due in 6 weeks and your father's old debts were still being called in by men who didn't send letters. They sent visits. The house itself was beautiful in the specific, cold way of places built to be looked at and not lived in. Marble floors that ate every footstep, a kitchen no one cooked in, a dining room set for 12 that had clearly not been used in a long time. The other staff, a cook, 2 groundsmen, a driver, were polite and said almost nothing. When Jessica asked the cook, an older woman named Mrs. Song, how long she'd worked here, Mrs. Song answered readily enough. When Jessica asked what happened to the maid before her, Mrs. Song found something urgent to do with a pot that didn't need attention. She met the man of the house on her 3rd day, and only by accident. She'd taken a wrong turn near the West Wing corridor. The door was solid, unmarked, no different from any other door except for the way everyone's shoulders changed when they passed it, and found him standing in front of it. Not moving, not doing anything a man like him should be caught doing. He didn't look like the stories. The stories described someone untouchable, someone who made grown men reroute their entire evenings rather than be in a room with him. What Jessica saw was a man in a dark coat standing very still in an empty hallway at 11 in the morning, staring at a locked door like it might answer him if he waited long enough. He noticed her before she could retreat. "You're new," he said, not a question. "Jessica. I clean the East Wing and the main house, sir. Min Jun." He said his own name, the way other men said their job title, flatly, like it was simply information. His eyes went to the door once more, then away, and whatever had been on his face folded itself back into nothing. "You should be somewhere else." It wasn't a threat. It was almost, she'd think about this later, turning it over, almost a warning, meant kindly. She left without being told twice. But she noticed the ledger that night, tucked in a drawer in the housekeeping office where she was cataloging supplies. A schedule book. Weeks of entries in careful handwriting that wasn't hers, wasn't Miss An's. A name at the top, Soo-yeon. The entries stopped midweek. No note, no resignation. Just a Tuesday, and then nothing after it, as if the woman who wrote them had been erased mid-sentence. Jessica closed the drawer and told herself it wasn't her business. She did not fully believe herself. That night, lying in the narrow bed in the East Wing, she heard footsteps in the hall outside her door. Slow, deliberate, stopping just past her room and not continuing. She lay still, counting her own heartbeat, until they finally moved on toward the West Wing and a door she'd been told never to touch. She did not sleep much after that. The cart was exactly where she'd left it the night before, parked against the wall of the main corridor, except now it sat 6 feet closer to the West Wing door, angled as if someone had wheeled it there, and stopped, thought better of it, and walked away. Jessica stood looking at it for a long moment before she moved it back. She didn't ask anyone about it. She'd learned already that questions in this house didn't get answered. They got absorbed, swallowed into polite silence like water into dry ground. So she started watching instead of asking. It was a skill she already had. 3 years of being staff in other people's houses had taught her that the people who talked never knew anything worth hearing, and the people who knew things never talked. Mrs. Song was the one who talked. Not about Soo-yeon, never directly, but around her. A comment about how the West Wing used to smell like lavender polish before it was just left. A mention, almost to herself, that Soo-yeon had been good with the antique silver, better than anyone since. Small things. The debris of a person who wasn't supposed to be discussed, but hadn't quite been erased from memory yet. Jessica pulled the household accounts while doing the monthly inventory, an errand Ms. An trusted her with now, a small promotion earned through 11 weeks of asking for nothing and doing everything right. Soo-yeon's final paycheck was still sitting in the ledger, uncollected. Her personal items were still boxed in a storage closet off the laundry room, taped shut, never shipped anywhere. A woman didn't leave behind 6 weeks of wages and her own belongings if she'd simply quit. She found Min-jun again on a Thursday, in the small library off the main hall, and this time he didn't dismiss her. "You've been asking Mrs. Song questions," he said, not looking up from whatever he was reading. "I ask everyone questions. It's how you learn a house. It's how you learn things you shouldn't." But there was no threat in it. He finally looked at her, and what she saw wasn't the cold, contained man from the corridor. It was something rawer underneath that, something that looked like exhaustion wearing a very expensive suit. "Whatever you think happened here, you're wrong, and you're safer not knowing which part. Is that a warning? It's the truth, which is more than most people in this house get from me." He left before she could answer, and Jessica stood in the library a long time afterward, turning that sentence over. Whatever you think happened. Not a denial, an acknowledgement that something had. The staff turnover records told her more than any conversation could. In 18 months, the household had cycled through 4 maids before her. 2 groundsmen quit inside of a season. Only Mrs. Song, the driver, and Miss An had any real tenure. The people, Jessica realized, who were trusted enough to know something the rest weren't. She started keeping her own notes, not because she planned to do anything with them, because if she was going to disappear the way Soo-yeon apparently had, she wanted there to be a record that started with her own hand, not someone else's. Min-jun's attention didn't stop. It sharpened. He found reasons to be in rooms she was cleaning, not watching her, exactly, more like a man standing near a fire he knew better than to touch. Once, folding linens in the hallway outside his study, she heard him on the phone, voice low and controlled in a way that still shook at the edges. "I don't care what Taeshik says the numbers show. Get me the real ledger, the one he doesn't know I have." She didn't understand the name yet. She would. That night, she found an envelope slid half under her door. No note inside, just a single key, old brass, worn smooth on one edge from years of use. It fit a lock she hadn't tried yet. She told herself she wouldn't use the key. She told herself that for exactly 1 day. The corridor was empty when she finally went. The household settled into the particular quiet of an estate at midnight. No footsteps, no voices, just the tick of an old clock somewhere down the hall, and her own pulse loud in her ears. The door was still open that same inch it had been the night before, as if it had been waiting for her the whole time and simply gotten tired of pretending otherwise. The key wasn't even necessary. She pushed the door the rest of the way open with 2 fingers. It wasn't what she'd braced for. No crime scene, no violence. If anything, it was the opposite. A room preserved the way a museum preserves a life that's already over. A cardigan still hung over the back of a chair. A hairbrush sat on the dresser with strands of dark hair still caught in the bristles. A cup, long since gone to dust inside, still sat on the nightstand, where someone had set it down and never come back to finish it. This was Soo-yeon's room, untouched, guarded, grieved over, not hidden. On the desk, in a drawer that wasn't locked because nobody expected anyone to get this far, Jessica found the ledger Min-jun had mentioned on the phone. The real one, not the one that circulated through the household accounts. Columns of numbers in a hand she didn't recognize, cross-referenced against dates and shipment names. It took her 20 minutes of comparing it to the accounts she already knew from her inventory work to understand what she was looking at. Money was being moved out of Minjun's accounts and into a rival syndicate's under his name, but the signatures authorizing it weren't his. They were Taeshik's, his own second-in-command, forging Minjun's authority to make it look like Minjun was the one skimming, building a debt and a betrayal that belonged to someone else entirely. Soo-yeon had found this ledger first, and Soo-yeon had never left the house walking. Jessica heard it then. Not a memory, an actual sound. Footsteps in the hallway, deliberate and unhurried, the same pace she'd heard outside her door that first week. She had time to slide the ledger under her sweater, and nothing else before the door opened all the way. It wasn't Minjun. Taeshik stood in the doorway, pleasant-faced, hands in his pockets, looking at her the way a man looks at a problem he's already decided how to solve. "You shouldn't be in here. I got turned around." "No," he said, almost gently, "you didn't." His eyes went to the drawer, still open a half-inch too far, and something in his expression settled into certainty. Soo-yeon got turned around too. Right about here, actually. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. He simply stepped aside from the doorway, an invitation to leave that felt exactly like a countdown starting. "Put whatever you found back where it was," he said, "and we'll both forget this happened. That's the version where you get to keep your Sundays." Jessica walked past him without answering, the ledger burning against her ribs the entire way back to her room, and did not sleep at all that night. Not from fear alone, but from the cold, clear understanding settling into her that this was no longer a mystery she could quietly close the drawer on. Soo-yeon hadn't run. Soo-yeon had simply run out of time before she could get the truth somewhere it couldn't be buried. Jessica had that time. For now. The unlocked door told her everything she needed to know. Taeshik wasn't guessing anymore. He knew, and a woman who knows doesn't get the courtesy of being warned twice. Jessica didn't run to Minjun. That was the instinct. Go to the man with the power, hand him the danger, let him fix it. But Soo-yeon had likely trusted exactly that instinct, and Soo-yeon's cardigan was still hanging over an empty chair. Whatever Jessica did next, she wasn't going to do it as someone waiting to be rescued. She spent the morning moving like nothing was wrong. Laundry, the East Wing, breakfast trays, while her mind worked a different problem entirely. She didn't have Minjun's resources. She didn't have his contacts, his money, his name. What she had was the one thing every person in this house had always underestimated. Nobody watched where the housekeeper's hands went. She photographed the ledger pages that morning, standing in the laundry room, with her phone angled low, quick and unremarkable, the way she'd learned to be invisible, doing far smaller things for far smaller reasons. Then she did the part that actually mattered, the part that made this her plan, and not Minjun's. She didn't send the photos to Minjun. Sending them to him kept the truth inside his war, where it could still be buried by someone with more power than her. Instead, she used the one contact she'd built in 11 months that had nothing to do with this house at all. A former co-worker from her agency days, now working the front desk at a business journal that covered exactly the kind of syndicate finance reporting men like Taeshik hated seeing daylight. Just enough. Enough that a story with dates, names, and real signatures would start moving through channels no one inside this house controlled. Then, and only then, she went to find Minjun. She told him what she'd found in the West Wing, not asking permission, not soft-pedaling it. She told him about Taeshik in the doorway, about the unlocked door at dawn. She put the ledger photos on his desk and watched something in his face go very still. The particular stillness of a man recalculating an entire year of his life in real time. "You went into that room," he said quietly. "You gave me the key. I didn't think you'd use it." "Then you shouldn't have left it under my door." She held his gaze. Soo-yeon didn't run. She found this before I did, and it cost her everything. I'm not interested in being the second maid this house quietly loses. For the first time since she'd arrived, Minjun looked at her like she wasn't staff, wasn't a stranger, wasn't a problem to be managed. And he looked at her like someone who'd just done, alone and without being asked, the one thing he'd spent a year failing to do himself, get the truth somewhere. Taeshik couldn't reach it first. "What did you send?" he asked. "And to who?" "Enough to make sure that if something happens to me, it doesn't stay buried with me." Taeshik didn't get a trial. Men like him never did. Not in this world, where the only court that mattered was the one Minjun presided over himself, and the only sentence that meant anything was the kind that traveled fast through every syndicate that had ever done business with this house. By nightfall, the story had done what Jessica intended. It had stopped being a secret anyone could contain, and started being a fact everyone in Taishik's world had to answer to. What happened to him after that happened in rooms Jessica was never shown, and she didn't ask. What she was shown was Min Jun, standing once more in the doorway of the West Wing, except this time the door was fully open, and he wasn't just looking at it. He was finally letting it be emptied. Two of the groundsmen carried out boxes under his direction. The cardigan, the hairbrush, the untouched cup finally washed and put away. Min Jun didn't help carry anything. He stood in the hallway and watched a year of guilt get boxed up piece by piece, his face doing something Jessica hadn't seen it do before. Not breaking, exactly. Setting down something it had been holding too long. He didn't say anything to her about it. That wasn't his language, she'd learned. Not grand declarations, not neat apologies. His language was showing up in a hallway and letting someone see the cost of what had actually happened, without asking her to carry any of it for him. Jessica was in her room 3 days later, packing the small bag she'd arrived with, when she found him in her doorway instead of the hallways. "You're leaving," he said. Not a question, the way he'd said her name that first day. "The job I signed up for isn't the job I've been doing. I think we both know that. You could stay." He said it plainly, the same flat delivery he gave everything, but there was nothing flat underneath it. Not as staff, as... He stopped, visibly searching for a version of the sentence that didn't sound like a debt being called in, the way every other request in his life did. If this were just a house, not the other thing, would you stay in it? Jessica looked past him, down the hall, at the West Wing door standing open now, empty, no longer a shrine to anything. She didn't answer right away. Her hand stayed on the strap of her bag, the choice sitting in the space between them, unresolved, unrushed. The first thing in 11 months that hadn't been decided for her by someone else's danger. The scene held there. No embrace, no answer spoken aloud, just her hand on the strap, his question still hanging in the doorway, and 11 months of silence finally asking her something instead of warning her away from it.